8. I spent well over an hour at Abigail Abernathy's place, and was rather sad to leave. She made spiced chai tea, and continued providing the best information I'd received on Liza so far. By the time I left, I knew I had to pay Madeline Price another visit. If Madeline and Liza were not close friends, if there was distance, it seemed strange that Madeline was the last person to speak with Liza before she died. I needed to find out why they were meeting the day she was murdered. I was sure Madeline had more information than she was sharing. Perhaps Liza and Madeline had worked together in some type of business, but why would that need to be a secret? Also, why would they meet in Brightmoor? Abigail Abernathy had been very helpful, but I still had more questions than answers. The next morning, I was out of bed by 5 a.m. and behind the wheel headed to Madeline's by 7:15. I managed to avoid snarls on US 23 by starting out before rush hour was in full swing. It was cold and brisk outside, leaving a frosty layer on the back roads around Ann Arbor. I cautiously maneuvered over what may or may not have been black ice, and slowed to a crawl as I approached Madeline's driveway. I was back at her converted barn by 8 o'clock in the morning. The Taurus rolled over the frozen dirt roads with ease, but as soon as I stepped out of the car, a frigid wind hit me in the face. The door was unlocked, and the "We're open" sign was dangling in the door. A little bell alerted Madeline to my entrance. "I'll be with you in a moment," she called from the studio. Within a few minutes, she walked out into the foyer and stopped short. "What brings you by, Mrs. Wilcox?" "This." I pulled out the picture of Liza, the unidentified man, and the baby. Madeline flinched. "What is that?" "A photo, Miss Price. Is this the type of different lifestyle you were living when you met Liza?" "That is not any of your business." "Do you know who the man is?" "Speaking of business, did you and Liza have some type of business? I've heard that your meetings weren't exactly the typical girls' night out." "Mrs. Wilcox, I am sorry that you are having trouble finding information, but that is why this is a cold case. There are just some things we don't know about Liza's past. Miss Price, I'm trying to get closure for a man who lost his wife, the mother of his children. If you have information that will help me do that, I need it. I just want the truth. I've told you everything I know." "Do you know this man in the picture?" I shoved the photo into her line of sight. "No, Mrs. Wilcox. This is my business. If you have more questions, feel free to call, but don't stop by unannounced. If it happens again, I'll be forced to call the police." The downside of being a private detective is not having the authority to interrogate witnesses or suspects. They have to be willing to cooperate with you. I put the picture back in my pocket. "Thanks for your time," I said, turning to leave. It was clear Madeline was lying, but I needed more data to push her over the edge. Back at the office, Martin and I discussed the possibilities. "Madeline is doing well, but maybe her business is a front for running drugs," Martin said. "I don't see Madeline and Liza as needing to run drugs. Why do it, if not for the money? There's the gang connection. They're both tied to this DeMario character. He's in prison, but he might have someone on the outside giving orders. He could have them doing his bidding while he's locked up. Are you going to take this to the husband?" "Not yet." "Yeah, hearing that the yoga teacher or trophy wife lived a torrid life in the worst slum in Detroit would probably be pretty shocking to the doctor. Not exactly the profile you'd expect for either one of them. What's the deal with the guy they have in common?" "It looks like DeMario Masters was just a high school fling kind of thing for both of them. I'm pretty sure he's the father of Madeline's daughter, but he probably has children all over the city. It's not uncommon for Brightmoor babies to have deadbeat dads. Liza probably just got caught up in the mess. I bet that was Madeline and DeMario's baby in the picture, with him and Liza. It could be a different guy. Regardless, it seems so weird that Liza and Madeline were friends," Martin said. "It definitely seems like an unlikely friendship. Then again, I feel the same way about Liza and Carson. I don't see the connection." I took out the picture of Liza, the man in the bandana, and the baby. Next, I pulled up the image of Kara Price at the spelling bee and held the picture next to the image on the computer. Similar wide-set eyes. The Kara's eyes were darker than they'd been when she was an infant, if the images were of the same child. Of course, that was not uncommon. Infants change so much as they grow. What's our next move? I don't know, Martin. Think. Search what we have and find out what we've missed. This job doesn't work the way it does on TV. I know. The sidekick usually drops a brilliant clue right about now. Martin gave me a smirk before grabbing his laptop and heading to his desk. We searched for random online tidbits on Liza and her connections for the next half an hour. I was getting ready to give Martin the rest of the afternoon off when the office phone rang. Sylvia Wilcox. This is Archie Paladowski. Paladowski's voice was deep, his tone careful and calculating. A hint of hesitation was clear in his voice. Mr. Paladowski. Thank you for calling. No problem. I am working on Liza Stark's murder. The murder book is slim, and I'm wondering if there is anything you might know that isn't in the file. Paladowski was silent for a few seconds before saying, You talked to the store owner. Yes. I spoke with Ali Mansu and he told me that there were problems with gangs before the body was found, but the issues stopped after Liza was murdered. He also said there were surveillance cameras, but I didn't find any tapes. Mrs. Wilcox, you worked for DPD, correct? Yes. He'd looked me up before calling. Then you know that there are some leads the boss won't let you pursue. For whatever reason, the chief didn't want us to work the gang angle. It was strange. They were gang members, so if we were able to get those guys on anything, even if it wasn't related to the murder, it should have been good, right? But we were cock-blocked. No idea why. Were there other leads you were told not to follow? Well, we never had an interview with the victim's in-laws. Strange. The first thing you had to do in a homicide like this one was rule out family members. I heard something about that. Were you told not to interview the Starks? No. They refused to meet with us, and we didn't really have any evidence that pointed to them, so the boss told us to leave it alone. We did, but there could have been something there. The families, Starks and Abernethys, don't like one another. Mr. Paladowski, I hope you don't mind my asking, but I am wondering why this case caused you to leave the force. Paladowski sighed a few times, as if he was fighting with whether he was going to answer the question. We took a lot of flack for not closing the case. First, we were being pushed to close the case fast, but after we started getting somewhere, or at least trying to formulate theories, we were stopped from investigating the crime. Did you think this was a gang hit of some sort? There was an inclination to draw that conclusion, because in the months following the murder, there weren't any attacks on the store. Seemed like that was a viable avenue, but as you know, gangbangers are not just gonna stop. And rich people don't do anything for themselves, so I thought Carson might have paid the gang members to kill his wife because she was unfaithful. That's why you wanted more access to the Stark family. Correct. I just thought that them gangbangers would only stop if they had some type of incentive. That was my original theory, but we had to handle the family with kid gloves. It was sickening. The families despise one another, and the husband is an only child. His family has had money for a long time. The Abernethys, not so much. Carson was this golden boy hero type that had everything. His parents had him after they'd given up on having kids, so he's kind of miracle. He's used to getting his way. What happens if his wife steps out on him? Due to Carson's status, his union with Liza was even more strange. Golden boy meets failing girl. His parents hire a hitman to off failing girl, getting their golden boy back. Was that a realistic scenario? Carson seemed genuinely distraught over losing Liza. It was hard to imagine that any parents would deliberately cause their son so much pain. Seems harsh. Were you able to learn anything else about the Starks? Just the stuff we found online. Things are pretty tight-lipped about them. What about the friend Lisa was going to meet? Did she ever make the suspect list? A long, uncomfortable silence filled the phone. Mr. Paladowski, are you still there? Yes. Yes and no. Madeline Price made our suspect list, but she was quickly removed. Because you and Cole cleared her, or did the brass tell you to remove her? Another pause before he said, we removed her because there wasn't anything there. She's not terribly forthcoming, but that has nothing to do with her guilt or innocence. Just seems to be who she is. I caught a hint of defensiveness in his voice. Perhaps he had developed a fondness for Madeline Price. What was it with this lady? She seemed to be able to cast a spell on men. Mr. Paladowski, this is a bit of a personal question, and I understand if you don't want to answer it, but why did you leave the force? This time he answered as soon as the question was out of my mouth. DPD was not what my dad and his buddies told me it was. I wanted to fight for justice. Not politics and corruption. There are a lot of people doing a lot of good outside of the force. This case just got things all twisted, and it was hard to see straight. I decided I'd had enough of the city and DPD. I quit and headed west. Got a little farm out here. Get to go surfing often, just decided I'd had enough. You know how it is. Organic farming. That's quite a change. It is. A necessary change. Anything else you want to tell me? Just, don't mess up anything you don't have to mess up. If you stumble on something good, even if it is strange, let it be. I'm sure that will mean something in time. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me. Sure thing. Just keep my name out of things. Yes. I promise to do that. The phone call with Archie Paladowski didn't expand any of my working theories. The gang angle was interesting, but since Carson had hired me, it didn't make any sense. Not to mention there still was no evidence of Liza having an affair, except for Abigail's assumptions. There did seem to be some type of gang connection, based on the picture Peter Abernathy had given me. I stayed up half the night, wondering about a myriad of possibilities, before falling asleep on the couch. The next morning, I headed out to meet Detective Cole. We met at a tiny cafe in Redford Township. Cole had deep bags under his eyes and his striped tie was crooked. He looked disheveled. Hey. Rough night? You have no idea. Archie might have had the right idea. Pull up stakes, quit this job and move west. Speaking of Arch, I heard he called you. Yeah, he did. I appreciate you passing on the message. He had a few cryptic tips that will probably mean something later. Everything means something eventually. No coincidences in this world. If this job has taught me anything, it's that. Nothing is a coincidence. What can you tell me about Demario Masters? I asked. Shifting gears. I recommend that you reconsider working this case. You've stumbled upon a member of one of the most notorious crime families in Detroit, Detective Cole told me. Really? Tell me more. Cole shook his head and fished a small envelope out of his back pocket. I can tell you he's a dirty bastard. Born into a low-grade crime family, but the Masters are crafty. They make money, but they blow it on stupid things, which is why I call them a low-grade crime family. The Masters have been killing and selling dope since the late 60s. None of them have ever done time for either one of those offenses, and only Demario has done hard time. Demario's father was a supplier of heroin at an automotive plant, his brother has served time for identity theft, and his pseudo-brother-in-law allegedly killed his dad. The Masters are Detroit at its worst. Cole dumped the contents of the envelope onto the table and spread out pictures of a tall, wiry man with long, smooth braids cascading down his back, the same man who was in the pictures Peter had given me. In one photo, the man was posing with a sawed-off shotgun. In another, he was flanked by a man and a woman, his siblings presumably, based on the matching high cheekbones and slanted eyes. The trio held up wads of cash as proof of the family fortune. This dude is smart. Almost won his most recent appeal, but he's insane, that's what lost it for him. The prosecutor exposed his psychopathic tendencies, proved that he was just as unstable as we'd speculated. Generally, he had been unable to hold down a job, was a known abuser of women and children, and he came off as calculating to the jury. There was no way he could have been innocent in the jury's eyes. And it's a good thing that they felt that way. This guy is a pariah. I think he might be tied to the Stark case I'm working. We didn't find any evidence of that. I believe he had a child with one of the character witnesses, Madeline Price. Really? The yoga teacher? No way. She was not his type. Yes. Apparently, there was a bit of a love triangle. This Demario Masters is tied to both Liza and Madeline. In the 90s, Liza lived literally around the corner from Madeline. Their boyfriends were friends, and Liza's body was found in the alley between the two streets where they lived. The murder was in 2011. How do you think that fits? I'm not sure. I just think it's too much of a coincidence that Madeline Price and Liza both lived in that neighborhood, and that they were involved with the same thug. You have a point, but Masters has been in jail for a while. He wasn't free during the time of the murder. Yeah, but I think Masters may have known a guy who was dating Liza at the time. And you think the murder in 2011 was a revenge plot? It all sounded so far-fetched, but street life and poverty were fueled by necessity. The dealers never made enough to elevate themselves from the neighborhood, and the hits they carried out were usually determined by desperation. What I couldn't figure out was why someone would come back and kill Liza after more than a decade had passed. I just want a little info before I drive out to the state prison to talk to this guy. What's his Achilles heel? Cole shook his head and smirked. You really think there's something there, don't you? Yeah. Just have a feeling. Okay. Well, like I told you, this guy, he's smart. He knows how to manipulate, but he was abused as a child. The pain and suffering from his childhood really make him long for normalcy. Underneath all the violence, all he ever wanted was what we all want: love, money, family, a place to belong. He was just too sick to make it all work out. If he's a psychopath, he can't feel empathy. No, but he's a high-functioning psychopath. He knows that he's different. He'd never admit that the difference is the reason he cannot function, but he's aware of it. Play his game, that's how you'll get info out of him. Coldness. I'm not unfamiliar with it, nor am I above using it as a tactic. Some people become savvy criminals, others go into law enforcement. Anything else? Yeah. Did you talk to the sister-in-law? Yes. She gave me some information. The Starks are in construction, and the Abernathys are in real estate. Liza was going to be added to her father's will, and the brother didn't like that. Cole's eyes lit up. I watched a nervous hand grip the edge of his non-fat soy latte. What? Cole swirled his drink in a circle. A possible attempt to further mix his fancy coffee, or a show of nervous energy? The chief wasn't too keen on the case. Just be careful. Why? Well, some people thought that she got exactly what she deserved. Women don't get the benefit of the doubt when they're out cheating. What evidence was there that she was cheating? Location, location, location. You don't think there could be any other explanation? You got a better reason why she was sniffing around Brightmoor? Cole asked. I work on infidelity cases, and this thing feels different. I think something from the past came back to haunt Liza. Her friend is tied up in this thing too. I just have to figure out how. Maybe we missed something. Like I said, no one wanted us to dig too deep. I know how that goes. Any last-minute advice for my visit with Masters? When you go to see this guy, you need to make him think that you respect his intelligence, and treat him like you would an old friend or something like that. He is huge on respect. Oh, and take some Twinkies and Mountain Dew with you. The guys around the precinct told me he loves that stuff. Respect. Okay, I can do that. Disgusting pop and sugar-filled sponges masquerading as food. Any other tips? Don't ask him about the crime he committed. He's adamant that he didn't do it. The sexual abuse he experienced as a child really scarred him, and I think it drives him crazy to know that he has caused a child the same type of pain he experienced. I don't have any power to wheel or deal. Better do some recon before I drive 2.5 hours. He has family in the area. You might want to talk to them first. They'll know more about him than I do. I just know what we saw in the courtroom. I thanked Cole and went back to the office to conduct more research on Masters and his family. The summary of DeMario Masters' life looked dismal, even on paper. He was number 4 of 5 children. One sister was deceased, one lived in California, and one lived in Brightmoor. There wasn't a current address for DeMario's brother, but there was a number for Sarah Quick, the sister in California, and an address for his other sister, Elissa Masters. Masters only had 2 siblings who had avoided the criminal justice system: the half-sister, Sarah Quick, who was 15 years older than the next sibling, and Daria, the deceased sibling who had been 3 years older than DeMario. Elissa Masters had a mugshot online, plus a list of petty offenses. Sarah Quick, by all appearances, was doing well. She was a psychiatric nurse with 3 sons of her own, living in Southern California. Sarah's social media pages presented her as being single, and all her pictures included one or more of her 3 curly-haired boys. Her sons looked to be in their 20s, and each one had inherited her mysterious hazel eyes. They were quite a lovely family. I hated to bother them, but just as in Peter's case, no one dishes like a sibling. Perhaps the geographical separation was in place for a reason. The phone rang once before the call connected. "This is Sarah Quick," said the woman on the other end of the phone in a monotonous voice. "Hello, Miss Quick. My name is Sylvia Wilcox. I'm a private investigator reviewing the murder of Liza Abernathy, a woman I've been told dated your brother at one time." Brief silence was followed by a frustrated sigh. "I remember Liza. She was trash, but so was my brother. Just trashy people. I'm sorry that she was murdered, but she wasn't the best person. Would you mind telling me what you remember about your brother DeMario and his relationship with Liza Abernathy?" "My brother is just like his father, Albert Masters, a cheater, dishonest, and not fit for society. The difference was that Albert was smart enough to stay out of prison, but my brothers didn't inherit his cunning ways. They are both stupid criminals." Dead air followed a short pause. I waited for more information. Liza Abernathy wasn't a good person. She was like my father. My mother, who was also a swindling, criminal-minded individual, met my father Oliver Quick, got pregnant, and the man never showed his face again. Liza was like him. She went slumming for a while, found the worst man she could locate, and then ran away one night. She left her firstborn child with a criminal. A child? This was the first I'd heard of a child outside of Liza's marriage. The pictures of her, DeMario Masters, and the baby flashed through my mind. "Liza had a child with your brother?" "Yes. They had a little girl, and she left her with my brother. Don't you think that's trashy?" I ignored the question and asked, "Do you know where the daughter is?" "Not offhand." "Do you think that DeMario would have gotten in touch with Liza before her murder?" "Possibly. I haven't spoken to my brother or my other siblings in a few years. I send cards for the holidays, but that is the extent of our connection these days. I moved to California to get away from my family. They were constantly asking for money, and we're just halves, none of them are whole siblings, so I packed my bags and moved as far as possible away from them." I was sketching a rough family tree for the Abernathys and the Masters while I listened to Sarah Quick. Her bitterness was thick and harsh. Once again, an angry sibling was ready to talk. "What happened to your niece?" "No idea. She could be dead, or she could be in the juvenile justice system by now. The Masters have bad blood. I tried my best to keep my boys away from them." "Do you know Madeline Price?" "Yes. My brother had a baby with her as well, but Madeline was smart. She just made a mistake when she was young, but after a short time with DeMario, she got wise and left him. I don't think he ever saw her little girl again. Sounds bad, but it was definitely for the best. Liza Abernathy abandoned her child to Demario? I know you haven't had contact with her in a while, but do you remember her name? Danica. She was a cute little thing, deserved something better than those two losers. I haven't had much contact, but I'm willing to bet she is in a terrible place if she's made it this far. The accounts of Liza's life continued to take sad turns. I'd never met Liza, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for the way her life had worked out. Distant parents, angry brother, at least she had Carson and Abigail. I took a small comfort, because Liza had a few people in her life who truly knew and loved her. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Is there anything else you can think of? Liza was probably seeing some guy in Brightmoor. She was obsessed with my brother. It didn't matter what he did, she fought to be with him. Do you recall when they met? Let's see, he was incarcerated between the ages of 15 and 19, so he would have gotten out in January 1996. He met Madeline, who was just a kid, and got her pregnant, but she was always too smart for him. Cunning and crafty, but not the worst person in the world. We knew she would leave him sooner or later. Liza gave birth not too long after Madeline's baby turned a year old. That was when Madeline decided to leave him. I had stopped drawing the family tree. Madeline Price had a child by Demario Masters. I thought of the calm, quiet yoga teacher living in the converted farmhouse on the outskirts of Ann Arbor. In theory, there was no way she had ever been connected to a thug, but the proof was overwhelming that she, in fact, had been involved with Demario Masters. But what was even more shocking was that Liza had a child with Demario, and this was the first I was hearing of her. It was unbelievable. Miss Quick, I just want to be sure that I have this straight. Okay. Liza Abernathy and Madeline Price both have children by Demario Masters. They were caught in a love triangle that resulted in 2 children, correct? Yes. Liza and Madeline were enemies, or at least rivals? Correct. My brain almost refused to accept what I was being told. Then I started analyzing the conversation I'd had with Madeline. She and Liza had met when they were living a different kind of life. Their boyfriends hadn't been friends. Instead, the 2 women had been involved with the same man. Miss Quick, thank you so much for the information. You're welcome. I appreciate your time. I grabbed my pen and started writing down the suspected timeline. Madeline had given birth to a baby in December 1996, and Liza's baby had been born in April 1998. The timeline was remarkably short. Demario and Liza would have been living in Brightmoor around that time, and somehow Madeline had neglected to bring up this curious connection she shared with Liza. In so doing, Madeline Price had just moved into the #1 murder suspect spot. 9. Charles sent me a text that evening about meeting with his informant Don. He'd set it up for 10 o'clock the next morning at Lucis Coney Island in Brightmoor. After my run, Martin came over and I informed him of what I'd learned. Madeline Price is our suspect, he asked. Yes. She lied about how she met Liza, and she was also part of a love triangle between her, Demario, and Liza. Revenge, maybe a little jealousy or envy. I don't know, but she's #1 and I need anything you can find on her. Anything. Okay. I have to meet up with an informant in Brightmoor. I'll call you when we're done. The freeways were kind, and I arrived at Lucis Coney Island around 9:45 a.m. A tall man in a black hoodie and dark glasses stood out front. Don was lanky and rough around the edges, but you could see that he had once been attractive. His dark skin showed the wear and tear of short stints in jail and a life spent in poverty. He was standing in front of the restaurant smoking a cigarette when I pulled up. Charles must have told him what I looked like, because he stomped out his smoke, pulled a pair of sunglasses out of his pocket, and slipped them on. Don? I guess you must be Sylvia, he said, holding out his hand. He gave my hand a vigorous shake before opening the door to the restaurant and following me to a booth in the back. As we sat down, I told him to order anything he wanted. "Thanks so much for meeting with me." "Ain't no thing," he said, removing his sunglasses. "I'm looking for information on a woman named Madeline Price. She would have lived on Dolphin Street between 96 and 98. She was 16 when she moved there, and she had a child named Kara." Don scratched his bald head and pulled a menu out of the carousel at the end of the table. "You talkin' about old times? I think I smoked away anything from the 90s. I was just a kid then." I dug a printout of Madeline's high school yearbook picture out of my purse and laid it in front of him. "Super smart girl, she wasn't from these parts." Don picked up the picture and studied it. His eyebrows creased. I could see the wheels turning. Ah yes, the agony of a pothead who strives to remember. "That Stripe girl." "Who?" "Stripe. He was this badass used to run with the gang. I wasn't never into gang stuff, but I know Stripe because he tried to roll for a while. He was lazy though. Couldn't leave him up in a spot if you wanted anything to get done." "I'm guessing that his real name was not Stripe?" "Probably not. Didn't know him too well. Just smoked wit I am every now and then. Had a lot of hair. Wore it in braids most of the time. Would puff it out every now and then. An afro. Reminded me of what Peter Abernathy had told me about the man Liza had brought home for the holidays." "What else can you tell me?" I asked, pulling out my notepad. "He about the same height as me. Some called IMD, used to be skinny, always pissed off, and ready to fight at a moment's notice. Had a kid or two. One might be this lady's baby. I don't know. Procreating with someone who called himself Stripe. That didn't sound like the little prim and proper Madeline Price I knew." "Do you remember a girl named Liza?" I asked, pulling one of the photos out of my purse Peter had given me and setting it on the table. Don looked at the picture, squinting his eyes and scratching his brow. "Yeah. I remember her. She was Stripe's girl too. Once there was like a showdown between the two. It was wild." "Can you tell me anything else about Liza?" "Not really. I didn't know her, but I remember the drama." "What can you tell me about the drama?" "Two girls fightin' over a dude who didn't care nothing for either one of them. Don't know much about it. Just know it was the gossip throughout the hood." I asked a few more questions that didn't net answers, told Don to order, paid his tab, and left. That night, I stayed at home and restricted myself from looking at any information about the case. Instead of working overtime, I seared a tenderloin, steamed asparagus, poured a glass of Merlot, and had a quiet dinner at the long pine table in the living room. I decorated the house with quaint antique furniture from thrift stores and estate sales. People were always throwing out old pieces of furniture because it wasn't new. I admired the past and spent my free time restoring the items I picked up. After dinner, I climbed into the bronze clawfoot tub in the master bathroom and soaked. My life wasn't perfect, but I had never had the type of pain and suffering Liza must have experienced. A sense of gratitude warmed my heart. "I'm lucky," I muttered and smiled before getting out of the tub, drying off and sliding under the soft, cool bamboo sheets. The next morning, Martin stopped by as I was finishing breakfast. I fixed him a plate of leftovers, 2 slices of bacon and scrambled eggs, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. He looked disheveled and exhausted. "Long night?" I asked. "Not too bad. I guess I'm just struggling to see any decent angles in this case." I felt a tinge of pain for pulling Martin into this murder case. We'd been working on infidelity cases for well over a year. Initially, I wasn't open to any cases that involved missing children or murder, because those are the 2 types of cases that get personal for me. One of the reasons I'd allowed my brother-in-law to be my assistant was because I thought it would be a good way to keep him safe. There was a certain amount of guilt in my heart over Derek's death. Keeping Martin safe and mentally healthy were priorities. Well, this is a tough case. Not really one I should have taken, and it's getting dangerous. I think you should stand down. I can handle this one. What's dangerous about it? I believe Madeline killed Liza, but Madeline and Liza were both involved with a gang member. I'm headed to the prison in Muskegon to visit Demario Masters. He's gang-affiliated, and he comes from a criminal family. Are you going to forfeit the case? A smarter woman would have given up the case and gone back to easier, safer work, but I knew what it was like to have a dead spouse and no answers. I knew what it was like to have an explanation that didn't make sense. Discovering the truth about Derek's death had been the most painful experience of my life, but now I could sleep at night. I wanted the same for Carson, and anyone else who'd lost a loved one under mysterious circumstances. No. I'm headed to Muskegon to talk with Liza and Madeline's ex-boyfriend. I need to meet with Madeline as well. She's a liar, by the way. You think this ex-boyfriend is related to the case? I need more information on both Liza and Madeline. Since Madeline is my #1 suspect, I need a motive for her hatred of Liza. Who better to get the info from than a gang member ex-boyfriend? I set a cup of coffee in front of Martin and gathered my notes from the table. Good point. He might be able to pinpoint a moment that may have spurred the revenge. But do you really think Madeline did this? No idea, but she's the best suspect I have. Carson just doesn't look plausible. Oh yeah, Liza also has a daughter with the thug, and guess who else has a child with him? No. Yes. Madeline and Liza have daughters who are half-sisters. That's huge. What the hell is going on? No clue, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm headed to the prison. Why don't you try to find Liza's kid? Her name is Danica Masters. Got it. I'm on it. Get an address, phone number, whatever you can. Normally I wouldn't tell you this, but if you have to, catfish. Pretend I didn't say that. I was out the door before Martin could answer. I stopped at the gas station and picked up the Mountain Dew and Twinkies before topping off my tank. The drive to the correctional facility in Muskegon was uneventful. I went through the pat-down and shoe check and was led into a large visiting room. I sat at a table and waited. Initially, I had been hesitant to visit the convict, but since he wasn't the person who'd killed Liza, and he was in prison, perhaps he would be willing to talk a bit about their relationship. What did he have to lose? Demario was a little over 6 feet tall, but he walked with a slightly bent gangsta gait. His hair, which was in silky black cornrows with streaks of gray, ran down his back. Slanted dark brown eyes darted around the room, as if he was checking to see if there was a way out. His face looked eager and full of impulsivity. Mr. Masters, I said, holding out my hand. Demario ignored my palm and slipped into the chair on the other side of the table. Call me D. Okay. My name is Sylvia Wilcox, and I'm here because I'm investigating the murder of Liza Stark. What? Liza? The convict's brow creased with concern, an unexpected expression. Yes. I'm sorry to tell you that Liza was shot 5 times behind a store in Brightmoor, about 2 years ago. How could he not know that Liza was dead? Demario Masters diverted his eyes to the floor, and for a minute, I thought they might brim over. I ain't got nothing to do with that. What you want from me? He asked. She had kids and a husband. I've been hired to find out what happened to her. Why you here? If she died a while ago, it couldn't be me. I was in here. Why you here? Good question. I didn't want to show all my cards. I would stay on the conservative side with the questions and answers. Liza's murder may have had something to do with her past. Why you think that? Brightmoor. The 2 of you lived there once, correct? Yeah. Well, she was murdered in Brightmoor. She had to have been there for some reason, and nothing in her current life would have led her there. Demario nodded, caught up in nostalgia. She never liked it there. Just played the game to be with me. How did you 2 meet? She was friends with this chick I knew. Madeline Price. You already know everything. Why you here? How did you 2 break up? Silence. D. How did you two break up? She left me. We were down in New Orleans. Had just moved to try something new. My mama was down there visiting, and we were getting things straight, but then she ran away on New Year's Eve. Threw a drink in my face and booked. The mysterious move to New Orleans was proving once again to be intriguing. How long did you live in New Orleans? I stayed there for about 2 years. Liza left after 2 or 3 months. Do you know why she left? Not really, but I think it was all about Daddy's money. As long as she was with me, she couldn't have Daddy's money. She had to work for things. I think she left because she wanted to be on Easy Street. I know she went on and married a doctor after she got back to Michigan. Gold digger. Did you talk with her once she returned to Michigan? Nope. Well, not for a long time. A few years later, after I'd moved back to Michigan, she tried taking me to court. For what? Just things we had between us. She wanted them returned? Material things. Something like that. What happened? She had a little addiction problem at the time. It was real hush-hush, but the judge threw out the case. How do you know she had a drug problem? Didn't say drugs. She was addicted to me. He chuckled and smirked with satisfaction. The girl was a good actress. Weren't you angry that she was having sex with you and taking you to court? DeMario shrugged his shoulders. Didn't make me no difference. She wasn't going to get far with none of that. We both knew it. A young white woman, challenging a black guy with a lengthy criminal history in court? Why wouldn't the case go far? What makes you say that? DeMario leaned across the table and whispered, because Liza never really wanted what she said she wanted. That's probably why she was in Brightmoor. She was looking for someone like me, not her husband. It was odd, the way that DeMario didn't hate Liza. He was a child molester, an abusive person and a convict with a long rap sheet, but he didn't hate this woman who had abandoned him and taken him to court. Why was he still sweet on her? You and Liza had a child. What happened to her? She died. When? DeMario pushed back from the table. I don't want to talk about that. This could be helpful. How is a dead child helpful? Look, lady, that don't make no sense and I'm done. I know you still care about Liza. Don't you want her to have justice? Nope. She dead. That's all the justice she need. She got Jesus now. The passive aggressiveness piqued my interest. It was clear that DeMario was affected by Liza's death and the death of their child. Although it seemed far-fetched, I was still convinced he knew something about Liza's murder. Okay. I have a question about Madeline Price. What about her? DeMario asked, in a curious, somewhat friendly tone. I could see why both Liza and Madeline had been attracted to him. He was gregarious, attractive, and smarter than he looked. What was Madeline Price like when you knew her? That bitch. Now she know exactly what she want. She's a scheming bitch. What do you want to know about her? You dated her? She's my baby mama. I heard that rumor. We got a kid together. I ain't seen my little girl since she was about 8 months, but I know she out there. What Madeline got to do with all of this? She was Liza's best friend. DeMario stood up from the table. Now you in here lying. They ain't never been friends. Are you sure? I dug out one of the photos Carson had given me. Liza and Madeline were standing arm in arm in front of a Christmas tree, smiles all around. DeMario looked at the picture before tossing it across the room. The thin photo floated and landed gently on the edge of the table. What the hell is going on? You lying to me? DeMario screamed, his cheeks hot with anger. My heartbeat increased as I watched the man slam his fist into the wall. A guard appeared at the door. I nodded to let him know things were okay. Yeah. Apparently they were good friends before Liza died. In fact, Madeline was the last person to talk with Liza before she was killed. Wait, lady, Just wait, okay? This don't make no sense. I need you to wait a minute. The convict sat back down at the table and placed his head in his hands. I felt a little bit guilty for rocking his world. I know this is a lot, but I think you want to see Liza's killer caught. I'm just trippin'. Tell me the truth. What is this all about? I don't know, Dee, that's why I'm here. Tell me about you and Madeline, and Liza and Madeline. What happened? DeMario provided me with a review of what I already knew, but also added some details I hadn't been aware of. The two women had caught him in lies, and Madeline had broken up with him. After Liza's baby was born, they moved to New Orleans to start a new life. She ran off on New Year's Eve of 1999, and he didn't see her again for a few years. Madeline had never filed for child support, so he hadn't been able to find Kara. He told me that the baby he'd had with Liza had tragically died soon after Liza left New Orleans, something I knew was a blatant lie. How did the baby die? Once again, DeMario refused to talk about his lost child, which I figured was because he didn't have time to make up a believable lie. I figured that I had gotten enough information from him for the day, but since he'd lied to me, no Mountain Dew or Twinkies would be left for him. I thanked DeMario for his time and called for the guard. I placed a quick call to Martin before hitting the road. Marty, I need you to do me a favor. Sure. Find court records for a civil case, Liza Abernathy versus DeMario Masters. Apparently, Liza took him to court for belongings or something after he returned from New Orleans. Any idea what year and county? Check years 2000 to 2002 in Wayne County. Liza lived in Livonia with her parents when she returned. On it. Did you learn anything else? Yeah. Master still has a thing for Liza. No way. Yes. He was a little hurt to hear that she was dead. I think it threw him off a bit, which may explain why he lied about Danica dying when she was a baby. Also, he seemed kind of indifferent about Liza taking him to court. He didn't have a lot of bad things to say about her, but he did say Liza never really wanted what she said she wanted. What do you think that means? I think it means that Liza's death definitely had something to do with a secret she was keeping. You might be right about the cheating. Aha. Rookie sleuth no more. Now, don't get carried away. I just said I'm willing to entertain the idea. No cigars yet, Kemisabi. Why do you think he lied about Danica? I don't know. Maybe he's just trying to protect her. Or maybe she decided to get revenge on a mother who abandoned her. I hope we aren't dealing with matricide, but we'd be negligent to not look into it. Rookie sleuth strikes again. Martin yelled into the phone. I hung up and headed for the highway. Traffic was sparse until I got within an hour of Metro Detroit. The drive home took an additional 20 minutes, pushing the clock beyond working hours. Martin sent a text informing me that he was heading to my house. Sometimes when days were long, he'd slip over to my place and take a nap. It usually meant that he had good information that couldn't wait until the next day. When I arrived, the house was quiet and still. Martin was sprawled out on the blue sofa in the living room. There were notes scattered on the floor, and his laptop was open at the end of the couch. I didn't want to disturb him, so I quietly went into the kitchen to prepare a meatloaf and throw some red potatoes in the oven. Afterwards, I took a long, soothing shower before changing into my comfortable sweats and an old white t-shirt of Derek's. I set the table for two and poured myself a glass of Shiraz. Why did Madeline and Liza continue to communicate when their pasts suggested they should be enemies? My mind began to list possible people who could provide insight into their complicated relationship, with siblings being at the top of the list once again. I wrote the name of DeMario's 3 living siblings and Peter's name on a slip of paper. I had already spoken to DeMario's half-sister in California, but the other siblings were in Detroit. They probably had a better grasp of their brothers' relationships. I grabbed Martin's laptop and typed each name into a search engine. After a few clicks, I pulled up the address of DeMario's sister Alyssa, who was living on the outskirts of Brightmoor. A number was attached to Alyssa's profile. I called the number, listened to a series of rings, and left a message when the voicemail came on. Next, I looked up his brother, who lived in the Cass Corridor section of Detroit. As far as Liza's brother went, I thought it might be a good idea to talk to Peter and his wife together. Of course, the recent divorce might make the meeting awkward, but I had a feeling that Abigail Abernathy could pull off the meeting without much trouble. I was asking a lot, but justice for Liza was worth it. I called Abigail Abernathy and asked, in the kindest voice possible, if she would be willing to meet with me one more time, and if we could ask Peter to join us. "You must think you have something then. We will meet with ya, Peter's here now. Can you stop by tomorrow morning?" "Sure thing. What time?" 9-ish? After we drop off the kids at school. I programmed the meeting into my phone and pulled dinner out of the oven. Martin was still snoring on the couch. I debated whether I should wake him up. One glance at his bony arm flopped over the edge of the couch made the decision for me. He needed a good meal. I called his name until he rolled over and opened his eyes. "Sorry, buddy, but it's dinner time." "That's okay. I'm hungry," Martin said as he twisted into a full-body stretch. "Hey, guess what?" "What?" "The court case you told me to research, guess what it was for?" "What?" "Liza took DeMario to court for custody of their daughter. She started the case, but abruptly dropped it for some reason." "What? Really?" "Looks that way." "Did you run a search for her?" "Sure did. Couldn't find anything." "Did you look for a death date? Just in case?" "Yeah. Nothing there. I'm pretty sure she's alive. We have to find her. I'm meeting with Peter and Abigail Abernathy tomorrow, and I might try to squeeze in a meeting with Alyssa Masters if I can reach her. This is an interesting development. Did you check social media?" "Yeah. Didn't find anything, but then again, some of the younger crowd like to use an alias for those accounts." "Good point. She's a teen, so I'm sure she has one or two. They're probably under some ridiculous moniker." "Yeah. It looks like Liza took DeMario Masters to court for custody of their daughter. It got a little ugly, and one of the things that came out was the idea that Liza didn't have any familial support. DeMario had sisters, older nieces and nephews, and his mother to help with the kid. To be honest, the way it was going, I think Liza would have lost." "Really? The man I just met doesn't scream Father of the Year." "Right, but if he had support and she didn't, he would appear to be the better choice. And it seems like she was completely unfit. After all, she left the kid with him. Abigail Abernathy, and everyone else I've talked to about Liza except for Carson, has portrayed her as being a little off. Common sense, from what I've heard, wasn't her strong suit. Here's the thing about the court case. The daughter, Danica, was almost 3 when all of that was taking place. Do you think she knows about it? Children are typically more aware than adults realize. In a complicated family, information might leak out in front of children. They may not know exactly what is going on, but Liza's daughter was somewhere out there with these memories of the mother who abandoned her, tried to get custody later on, but eventually decided it wasn't worth it. Danica needs to go on the suspect list. She's pretty young, isn't she? If she was with DeMario and his family, then she grew up in Brightmoor, which means she's much older than her birth certificate states. She was barely a teen when Liza was killed, but that's old enough to be a killer. Okay, so we're going with Madeline as our number 1 and Danica as our number 2. Martin looked a bit confused. I couldn't imagine a child murdering her mother, but it wasn't too far-fetched. I know. It's not what we want to see, but think about how maddening it would be to have a parent who abandoned you, then went on to have additional children and live in a mini mansion. Meanwhile, Danica was left to the wolves. Her father is in prison. Who knows where she's been living? My bet is that she's on the street. When you put it like that, It kind of makes me root for her. Well, yes, in a way, but the law is the law. You can't murder people, even if something bad has happened to you. Have you learned anything else about the Masters? Yes. I think it would be a good idea to track down the remaining siblings, especially the sister that lives in Detroit. She would likely have had more contact with DeMario than the others. When I searched their names, I found that she and DeMario lived under the same roof a number of times over the years. Danica probably lived with them as well. Exactly. We definitely need to find her. 10. Martin and I ate dinner and talked. There was one subject that always seemed to come up when the shop talk ended. So, I've been looking into Derek's death. I forked a piece of meatloaf into my mouth so that my silence wouldn't seem strange. Syl, I don't think he committed suicide. Chewing and staring off into the distance, I tried to remain cool and calm. Are you going to respond? Marty, I don't want to think about that right now. But what if there was a cover-up, and... Martin. Stop. Don't do this to yourself or me. Okay? No. Derek drove into the Huron River, that's it. There weren't any other cars around and he's gone. We need to love and cherish his memory. Martin shook his head and switched subjects. I've been researching Madeline Price. Do you really see her as a viable suspect? I was thankful that he had abandoned the idea of investigating his brother's death, but I knew he was going to pursue it quietly on his own. The secret I was keeping about Derek's autopsy burned in my throat. I still didn't understand why there was fentanyl in his blood. I had more questions than answers about Derek's death, but I wasn't sure what to do about that, so I had never mentioned the autopsy to Martin. She's a possibility, but I see your point, I said, following Martin's lead to change the topic. We need to consider other suspects like Danica and possibly Peter, but Madeline has more motive than anyone else we've come across. Do you really think she's our killer? She just seems like a little yoga instructor. Upstanding but full of secrets. When I was a cop, sometimes it was the least likely person who committed the crime. I'd have my eyes set on the obvious perpetrator, ready to strike at the first sign of a misstep, and then the upstanding righteous person would do something that would change the course of the investigation. Fair enough, but motive seems to be missing. The past could be her motive. Something happened, and she decided it was time to strike. Like what? What would make her kill Liza, after more than a decade of being done with the love triangle? Martin was right. Madeline Price seemed at peace with the world, and her relationship with Liza was intact at the time of the murder. They may have come together over time, creating some type of alliance against DeMario Masters. Well, I'll have more information tomorrow. Abigail and Peter Abernathy seem eager to speak with me. Maybe they can shed some light on an alternate suspect. Enough shop talk, I'm going to settle in for the night. You're welcome to stay. Thanks, but I better get home. I considered prying and asking if home was still a rented room in the basement of his old college roommate's house, but I refrained. He was a grown man, free to do what he pleased without an overbearing sister-in-law monitoring his life choices. Okay. I'll see you in the morning. I pushed back from the table and gathered our dinner plates. My mom is back. The plates on my forearm wobbled a bit. A fork went crashing to the floor. Oh, I see. I don't want you to worry. She's been okay this time. I really think she wants to have me in her life now. Of course. I'm happy to hear that. I wasn't, but what else could I say? I better get going, Martin said, slowly backing away from the table but maintaining eye contact. He wanted my approval. It mattered to him, so I did my best to smooth out the worry lines in my brow and smile. All right, kiddo. Have a good night. You too. Thanks for dinner, Syl. I pulled into Abigail Abernathy's driveway just after 9 a.m. the next morning. The doorbell echoed through the hallway, and I listened to Abigail lumbering through the foyer. She was smiling when she opened the door. Peter was standing in the background with his hands in his pockets. He nodded and forced a shy smirk onto his face. "Come on in. We're ready. Want some tea or coffee? We've got some pastries on the table too." "Coffee would be great," I said, climbing onto one of the bistro chairs around the red diner-style table. While Abigail was in the kitchen, Peter came and sat at the table. "Mr. Abernathy, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I want you to find Am." "Yes, I want to. Mrs. Wilcox, my youngest kid had a birthday the other day. My sister's kids were there, but my sister, she couldn't be there, and she'll never be there. Really hit me, you know? Because someone took her life, she's gone. Find this son of a bitch, Mrs. Wilcox. Whatever you need from us, we're willing to do." "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. I really appreciate the help. I would like to talk with you and your wife about what I've learned over the past few days." Abigail set a cup of piping hot coffee in front of me. I thanked her as she wiggled onto one of the bistro chairs. "Okay. We're ready for it. Tell us," Abigail said. "Peter, did you know that Madeline and Liza both dated Demario Masters, the man in the picture you gave me?" Peter frowned and shook his head. "No way. Madeline is a good girl. She wouldn't have nothing to do with a jerk like that." I decided not to force the issue. Peter obviously had some warm feelings for Madeline. If I pushed too hard, he'd probably shut down. "Who is Demario Masters?" Abigail asked. "A man that Liza dated a long time ago." Interesting," she said. "Mr. Abernathy, I need you to think about when Liza lived out of state. Did you have any contact with her?" "No. I didn't know that she had lived out of state, but then again, like I told you, we haven't ever been close. She lived in New Orleans for a few months." "Really? I never knew that. Did she go there with that dude?" "Yes. Liza moved back to Michigan in early 2000, leaving her daughter behind with Demario and his mother." "Daughter? What?" "Liza and Demario had a child in 1998, right before they moved to New Orleans. It looks like Liza may have left both Demario and the baby in New Orleans." "When did you say that she reconciled with your parents?" I'm not sure on exact dates, but she was definitely around in 2000. I remember coming home from state and being shocked when she pulled open the door. She didn't move back in until 2001, but she was around a little before that." "Do you recall her mentioning the name, Danica?" "Never." "Who is that?" "Danica Masters is her daughter." "What happened to her?" "Well, initially I thought she had died as an infant. Sudden infant death and infection, something like that, but I can't find anything that indicates she is deceased." "Oh no." Abigail sighed. Peter ran his hands through his spiked hair. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "I have a niece out there that I don't know. Liza left her with that loser's family. How old is she now?" "About 15. I haven't had any luck tracking her down, but just because there aren't clear records of her doesn't mean she's not out there. If she was left with the Masters, there's no way to know how she was raised or if she was taken to school. There is one curious court case from 12 years ago." "What is the case about?" "Custody. Liza fought for custody. She never told us." For the first time, Peter looked sad. His forehead creased, and he sat silent for a moment. "Listen, I know we probably sound like the most dysfunctional family ever, but you have to understand. Mom was always trying to put on this show, and if we didn't go along with it, she tried to force it. You know what I mean? Why don't you explain it to me?" "Just to be sure I understand," I said, gently encouraging Peter to open up and share more information. "Mom wanted this perfect little family, and we weren't that. She wasn't willing to accept that we were human, so she forced us to do a lot of things that we didn't want to do. Some of which weren't good for us. Liza had to take all these ridiculous classes and extracurricular things because the other girls on our block were taking them. My sister was different. She needed more guidance than most, but my mom treated her like she had superstar intelligence, you know what I mean? I don't want to assume anything, I said, avoiding agreement so that Peter would continue. Okay, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Liza was a little behind the curve. She needed someone to remind her to bathe, eat, wash her hands, and there was no way she was going to complete her homework without a massive amount of help. She wasn't someone who did well on her own. My mom couldn't handle that. She refused to accept that Liza had a few screws loose. Loose screws? I wasn't sure if Peter was telling me that Liza was intellectually challenged, or if she had experienced some type of mental illness. Whatever the case, it sounded like Mrs. Abernathy had been disappointed in her. I know Carson isn't your favorite person, but I'm wondering how he and Liza got together. You said that Liza had some challenges, but Carson is a surgeon. How did those two get together? I don't know if it will be relevant, but they hooked up when Liza worked at a hospital for a while. I think she was a CNA or something like that. At one time she had thought of becoming a nurse, but the coursework was too rigorous. She never passed the test for her teacher certification, either. The girl wasn't good with academics, but from what I've heard, she really took to the CNA thing. Carson met her at the hospital, so he would have seen her in her best light. Liza was a certified nurse assistant at the hospital, and that's how she met Carson? Well, she volunteered at the hospital for a while before she worked there. Liza had a good heart. She could be very frustrating, but she always liked to help people if she could. By the time she met Carson, she'd been at our parents' house for a while. Since she wasn't working full-time, she volunteered to fill up her free time. Mom suggested she might want to become a nurse. Liza said okay, became a CNA and enrolled in night school. The coursework was hard for her, and after working as a CNA for a while, she quit school and started thinking about other stuff she could do. She'd been around Carson for a while by then, so he probably mentioned that teaching was a noble profession or something like that. He just happened to be Catholic, and I think that inspired her to want to teach at the Catholic school. We're Lutheran, so I think she took the teaching job to impress Carson. I knew Peter wouldn't be privy to major details about their courtship, but I was curious whether he knew one not-so-intimate detail. What did you think of Carson when you first met him? I thought he was okay. I mean, he wasn't really that bad at first. It seemed like he was really into Liza, so I liked him in the beginning. What changed? Peter rubbed his hands through his hair again. This time he dropped his head and shook it from side to side. Mrs. Wilcox, I have to be honest here. I know I told you I hated Carson, and that I thought he was responsible for Liza's death, but you must understand. For the past several years, I've hated everyone. Carson ain't my kind of person, but I think he genuinely loved my sister. He was gentle with her. It was like he understood her, and loved her just the way she was. They were happy. Abigail ran her hand along Peter's arm and gave it a squeeze. Peter Abernathy's gnarled face had softened and relaxed. He looked closer to his age, and his faded blue eyes glistened with emotion. The man had loved his sister. Thank you for being honest, Mr. Abernathy, I said, taking a pause before asking, so if it wasn't Carson, who would you say would be most likely to kill your sister? That's a good question. The only person I can think of is that Masters dude. I could see him having a grudge of some sort against her. If he'd married her, he would have moved up several socioeconomic levels. Their breakup was intense, and if there was a kid involved, I could see him being extremely bitter. Well, I thought that as well, but Demario Masters was in prison at the time of Liza's murder. Mr. Abernathy, I have an angle that you might not like, but I have a reason for thinking this is a possibility. Oh, go on. We want to know what you know, Abigail said. I prepared for my theory to be rejected. I think Madeline Price may have something to do with Liza's murder. Peter leaned forward, ready to protest, but Abigail held his arm, squeezing it again. He closed his mouth and waited. Why do you think that, Mrs. Wilcox? Abigail asked. Madeline and Liza were dating Demario Masters at the same time. It was a love triangle. Madeline was first, and Demario is the father of her daughter. Liza gave birth to Danica around Madeline's child's first birthday. Madeline left Demario, but not before having a confrontation with Liza. "A woman scorned," Abigail muttered. "Yes. So my first question is, how close were Liza and Madeline? My second question is, why were they close if they had that type of history, and why is Madeline tied to the place where Liza was found? She lived a block away. Liza was going to meet her when she was killed, and even though everyone has told me they were great friends, Madeline described Liza as a student when I interviewed her." "That doesn't sound good for Madeline," Peter said. "Ms. Price hasn't been forthcoming in interviews, and I'm looking for any information you have about her. I just have a feeling that she is connected to Liza's murder in some way." Abigail looked like she was contemplating whether what she had to say was relevant. After a few minutes of painful silence, she spoke. "Well, she is always out of town. It's strange. Liza would go with her sometimes, but like I told you, they didn't seem that close to me. It was strange that they would take trips together." "Okay. Good. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else?" "She's really strange when it comes to her kid. She doesn't even like people to know her name. It's like she's got this awesome kid stashed away at a fancy school, doing all types of great things, but she don't talk about her. I'm a mom, and I couldn't imagine not talking about my kids. That's weird." "Did you participate in any of the girls' nights that Liza and Madeline had?" "Well, like I said before, they weren't really girls' nights out. They weren't much fun when they were together. Liza and Madeline didn't have anything in common, and it showed when they hung out. Except for Demario Masters. Why would they be friends?" I asked if they could think of anything else, but neither of them had much to share. They told me they'd call if anything else came to mind. Not exactly an illuminating interview, but they'd reinforced some of the strange observations I'd made about Madeline. I left the Abernathys and headed for the office. 11. "She had to have been having an affair," Martin said. "I'm not getting that vibe. We also don't have any evidence to support that idea." Despite the recent addition of new leads, the case had reached a dead end. Martin and I found ourselves having the same discussion day after day. The longer we went without any progress or answers, the more disheartened I became. Martin's research had also hit a standstill, leaving us once again stuck in our office with no breakthroughs in sight. "Okay, how do we get out of this rut?" Martin asked. "I don't know where to go with this. Liza was murdered because of something that happened years ago, but then again, it might be because of some secret life she was living right before she died. But we have no proof that she was having an affair or doing anything else, so what the heck was she doing in Brightmoor?" "Yeah, that about sums it up. Nothing makes sense. Maybe we need to try something different." "Like what? What did you do when you got stuck on a case when you were a police officer?" I thought for a moment. What did I do when I was a cop? Usually, I would run some off-the-wall theory by my partner, or draw a diagram with the evidence and create a hypothesis. This time, I felt like there were too many missing links for either scenario. "We need more evidence." "I know, Marty, but I'm not sure where to get it." I stopped mid-sentence. Yes, I had talked to everyone I could reach, but maybe talk was cheap in this case. Maybe I needed to be watching instead of talking. I'd watched Madeline's place one evening over the past few weeks, but without additional evidence, the pursuit had seemed futile. But Madeline was a patient, intelligent woman. If she had something to hide, she would be incredibly elusive. I grabbed my phone, computer, and notepad. "Where ya going?" Martin asked. "To watch Madeline Price. Surveillance is not always effective, but when I have a good hunch, I will subject myself to hours upon hours of wasted time in a car. When I first started watching Madeline, she appeared to be a creature of habit. Her yoga classes ran from 8 a.m. to 12 o'clock noon on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and 12 o'clock to 3 p.m. on Saturdays. She taught a course at the U on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, and the rest of her time was spent meeting friends for lunch or dinner. She observed Sunday as a day of rest, which included church attendance. The first Sunday, I trailed her to St. Mary's Preparatory Campus, where she attended Mass with her daughter, followed by lunch. Then, after 3 weeks of watching Madeline go through the exact same routine, I gave up and stopped watching her. "Why aren't you watching her anymore?" Martin asked. "Because she's just a yoga teacher who happened to be casual friends with Liza. I'm not seeing the connection between them, or any sign that she had something to do with the murder." "But you had a hunch. Aren't detectives supposed to go with their hunches?" "Yes, but some detectives have better hunches than others. I really have no reason to follow her, other than I have nothing better to do." "At least it's something. Speaking of which, I have been thinking about the convict's sister, the one that won't call you back." "What's her name?" "Alyssa Masters." "What about her?" "Well, what if she knows something about the murder and that's why she isn't calling you back?" "Yeah, that's probably the case." "What's your point?" "Hear me out. She lives in Brightmoor, and her brother is locked up in prison. What if he had her kill Liza?" It was an interesting angle, but unlikely. Demario Masters had plenty of time to kill Liza before he went to prison. Why wait, and then have your sister do the dirty work? When he found out that Liza had been murdered, he also seemed genuinely shocked. I don't know that I see the connection there. I'm assuming that she still lives in Brightmoor because she's poor, and her family has a footprint there. But she and Liza knew each other. Isn't it possible that they were in contact? Yes. It actually is possible. Okay. We don't have anything else. Maybe this will go somewhere. Let's flesh it out a bit more. So we have Liza in Brightmoor several times before her death. Alyssa Masters lives there. Demario Masters has obviously been out of contact with Liza for many years, but there is a familial connection. Danica. Yes, Danica. She may have fallen into the foster care system, but she could also have been taken in by one of Demario's siblings. His younger brother is sick, according to the oldest sister, and one sister is dead, so Alyssa would be the only one Danica could be living with if she's with a close family member. Which might make her skittish about calling you back. She would want to shield her niece. The kid has already lost both parents, one to prison and the other to murder. Okay, Marty, I like it. Today I want you to find out everything you can about Alyssa Masters, where she works, her schedule, and any other interesting tidbits you happen to come across. I'm on it. Okay. I'll be out today. Where ya going? I have a hunch, I said, winking at Martin before heading out the door. The kid was right. I had a hunch, and I should follow it. So what if Madeline had not changed her routine in 3 weeks? She was stealthy and private. Maybe she even had an inclination that she was being followed. Now that I'd laid off for a day or so, any suspicion she might have had could be gone. My hunch was far-fetched, but I had nothing else to go on, so why not stick with it and see it through to the end? After all, Carson Stark was paying me a small fortune to find out what happened to his wife. Even if Madeline had nothing to do with Liza's death, I was sure she knew more than she'd told me. Madeline's routine schedule dragged on for 2 more weeks, but just as I was about to drop the surveillance gig for a second time, things got interesting. Madeline left the house around 6:15 one evening, just as dusk took over. She climbed into her Honda Accord and took off. A late winter storm had blanketed the Huron Valley in several inches of snow, which made tracking Madeline more difficult. I trailed her through the back roads, almost losing her on Geddes. She made a sharp turn that caused me to hesitate. I couldn't follow her, but I knew if I went back and turned left on Geddes Road, I'd find another road that would take me close to that area. I drove past the road, waited, and doubled back, pacing myself and letting a few other cars turn onto Prospect. The snow-covered fields and desolate two-lane road never saw much traffic, and even less at night. A dirt road in a winter storm isn't a popular means of transportation. I had to wait quite a while before another car turned. About 7 minutes after Madeline had gone down the road, I crept up behind a blue Mustang that was struggling to get traction in the heavy snow. Madeline's car was nowhere in sight, but there weren't many places to turn off the road. I figured she had to be at the end of whatever this thoroughfare was. While twisting through Ann Arbor's outer reaches, I noticed that the snow had thickened. I drove through the blanket of white, hoping that Madeline wasn't somewhere by the side of the road, listening to my tires crunching on the snow and ice. In the distance, I spotted a building with smokestacks puffing pollution into the air. I could see a few cars parked in front of it, but the last illumination of the day was fading. I quickly scanned the scene for Madeline's car, but came up with nothing. I continued to creep along the road, edging closer to the building, which looked like a small factory of some sort. There were tire tracks on a secluded road to the right of the structure. Proceeding could mean running the risk of being caught or getting stuck in the snow. If I parked on the far side of the factory, my car would appear to be just another employee vehicle. I pulled into a parking stall, bundled up in my down-filled coat, and headed out. The snow-covered brush was thick, and the large fluffy flakes reduced visibility. A pair of ski goggles shielded my eyes, but I still had trouble making out much of anything. I noticed a path of crushed snow that led deeper into the forest. I followed it for what seemed like a lifetime, but in reality was only about 10 minutes before I spotted a cottage sitting far back from the road. The small house could easily be missed if you didn't know what you were looking for. I walked over to the edge of the road, kneeled behind a thicket of bushes, and pulled out my binoculars. The cottage was hidden behind tangled branches and snowdrifts. I crept closer and focused the binoculars on the window blinds. Between the cracks, I could see that several young women and children were inside. I observed what I thought was probably the serving of dinner. 3 women were working in the kitchen, 2 women were setting places at the long wooden dinner table, and a few children milled about. Madeline was working underneath the kitchen sink, and appeared to be fixing a pipe. A leak, perhaps? From what I could tell, there wasn't much in the way of conversation. It wasn't a friendly scene. This was business. After Madeline had finished under the sink, she seemed to instruct the women on what to do and how to set the table. I watched a cold and unfeeling dinner unfold. Madeline stayed and ate with the others, but this was not a cordial gathering of friends. There was a crisp and formal feel to this meeting. The eyes of the women were dull and downcast, and their mouths silent. I scanned the group, noticing the somber looks. A very strange, social setting. I put the binoculars back in the case, and headed back to the car. My moccasin boots slipping on the fresh, hard powder as I made my way to the car. Okay, this isn't much, but it's a little odd. What? Martin asked. I had called him the moment I walked in the door. I trailed Madeline to this place, and she appeared to be freelancing as a plumber of some sort. She went to a cottage that was full of women and children, and it didn't look like a friendly get-together. Madeline fixed a pipe and had dinner, but I didn't see any chatting or smiles. I can't really figure out what the connection was between her and the other people there. Tell me more. Well, she fixed something under the sink, directed traffic in the house, and had dinner with the group. There wasn't much in the way of conversation or anything like that. Didn't really seem like a friendly scene. What do you think is going on? Not sure. They could just be some associates. Do you think this has anything to do with Liza's murder? That's hard to say. It just seems weird to head out to a secluded cottage, fix a pipe, and have dinner in a little cottage that is packed with women and children. That is odd. Guess what I found out about Danica? What? She's been in and out of foster care just like you thought, and you were also right about her living with Alyssa. She did live with her for about a year. I don't know what happened, but I don't think she's there anymore. She's going to Cody High on the other side of town. How'd you find that out? Spent a little time in Brightmoor. Why are there so many kids out during the day in that neighborhood? Truancy is their thing. How many kids did you talk with? 3. They were standing around in a huddle in front of a burned-out house. Didn't look like they were drug dealers or anything like that, so I talked with them. They know Danica. She's around sometimes, knows gang members, but she isn't part of the gang. Her dad is in prison, as you know, and she drifts in and out of the neighborhood. Sometimes she stays at a shelter in the area, other times she lives with friends or finds a way to get by. Alyssa does something in medial field, and she might go to school. Good job, Marty. This is great info. Now we know that we just have to be on the lookout for her. Maybe we should switch details. I can go to Brightmoor, and you can watch Madeline. I thought you'd search for info online. You don't think I'm tough enough for Brightmoor? It's not about being tough enough. I just don't want you to get hurt. I was happy to have the information, but the idea of Martin hanging out around Brightmoor gave me chills. I can handle it, Martin said, an edge in his voice. I know. Thank you for all of your hard work, I said, while simultaneously wondering how I could get Martin out of the detective business. The next morning, I drank 2 cups of strong coffee and headed out for an early morning run. Along the way, I recalled the strange scene I'd encountered the night before. How many women had been there? At least 12. How many children? 5. No, maybe 7. Nothing nefarious seemed to be going on, but something was off. What did it all mean? Strange fruit, but at least I had something new to ponder. The yoga instructor, abnormally calm best friend, had a secret of some kind. I wasn't sure what the secret meant, but being tucked away in a little cottage, half a mile from the road, showed that Madeline might have something to hide. Whatever it was, I intended to find out. After the run, I hopped in the shower, got dressed, and headed to the office. The winter thaw was beginning, making the stroll to the office rather pleasant. Martin arrived a few minutes after 9. What's the plan for today? Martin asked. We need to figure out what's happening at that cottage in the woods. I'll show you where it's located this evening. I want you to watch and see who comes and goes. Will I be able to sit in the car, or will I have to freeze outside? Well, if you park far enough away, you can stay in the car. Take some binoculars and you'll be fine. What about this morning? I'm going to see what else I can find out about Madeline. Why don't you print off all our information, organize it, and stick it in a binder? Easy enough, Martin said, grabbing his laptop and heading to the printer. I sat down at my desk and began researching Madeline Price again. After some math and guesstimating, I found Madeline's college graduation photo. There wasn't much information about her, but the blurb stated that she had attended U of M on a scholarship. During her time at the U, she was a straight-A student and the leader of several clubs, including a single mothers group. She was a natural leader and stood out from the crowd. Despite her active presence on social media, Madeline's personal life seemed to be devoid of any romantic relationships. While browsing through pictures of her daughter Kara, I noticed that Madeline was always pictured alone or with her daughter. It appeared that she had dedicated her time and energy to running the yoga studio and providing the best for her daughter. As I delved deeper into my research, I was surprised to find that there was no website for the yoga studio. How had Madeline built and maintained such a successful business while keeping such a low profile? Madeline had given her business a vague, uneventful title. If you looked up yoga studio, the address came up, but there was no name attached to the establishment. I was sure that she had a business license, but to have one, she had to have given a name of some sort. It was odd not to have specific information online. How did people find the studio? The best way to figure that out would be to talk to one of Madeline's patrons. I needed to get in touch with someone from Madeline's inner circle. My guess was that Madeline's patrons had other ties to her, and that was the way she acquired customers. Yoga classes that only took women, no official name for the studio, it was all so covert. The only way to learn more was to infiltrate. After a day of online sleuthing, Martin followed me to the cottage on the edge of Ann Arbor Township. We parked at the little factory, and I led Martin through the trees and showed him the little house. Large snowflakes fell that evening, creating a certain level of camouflage. "Stay out of sight, okay?" "Will do. You can sit in your car and wait to see if anyone drives down the road. If they do, try to follow them. Just don't get caught." "Don't worry. I've got this," he said, slight irritation slipping into his voice. "All right, kiddo. See you soon. Call me if you need anything." Martin nodded, and I headed back to my car. He didn't seem to suspect that I'd given him this job because it was safe. Days turned into weeks without leads. Nothing was happening, and each time Carson called asking to meet, I would make up an excuse as to why I was unavailable. I try to remain honest in my dealings with others, and I don't like to bring innocent people into the mix when researching a case. Unfortunately, I was at the point where I felt like I didn't have a choice. I needed information from an insider, someone in Madeline's world. I chose an early spring day at the end of March to put my plan into action. Parked at the edge of Madeline's driveway, tucked away behind the barren branches of winter-beaten trees, I waited until someone turned onto the main road. An hour passed before any cars emerged, but just as I felt my head start to nod with sleepy boredom, I heard the rattle and hum of a vehicle. An early 1980s blue Volkswagen Beetle crept along the bumpy dirt road, twisting and coughing before steadying itself on the blacktop. I waited 2 minutes for the bug to climb the small hill that sat a few hundred yards from Madeline's driveway before pulling onto the roadway. The blue bug chugged along Whitmore Lake Road on the edges of rural Ann Arbor Township until it came to Barton Drive. It snaked along to Plymouth Road and eventually stopped at Mocha's on Main, a tiny coffee shop on Main Street. A young woman climbed out of the car and grabbed an apron from the back seat before heading into the coffee shop. I wrote down the license plate number of her car and the address of the coffee shop before heading home to change. If I was going to chat up a barista, I needed to look the part. I called Mocha's on Main as soon as I got home. The first time I called, a man with a deep trombone voice answered the phone. I hung up and called 10 minutes later. This time, a woman with a soft southern drawl purred into the phone. "It's a great day at Mocha's on Main, this is Lucretia. How can I help you?" "Hello. What are your hours today?" "We're open till 10 tonight." "Thank you," I said before hanging up. Lucretia. Okay, so now I had a name. It was like having one drop of water in a pond, but it was something. I typed in Lucretia, Mocha's on Main, and Ann Arbor into a search engine. The combination pulled up hundreds of results. Switching to a social media site reduced the results to 12. I sifted through each result, ruling out the ones with pictures immediately, and concentrating on the 5 that didn't have pictures. In the end, I settled on the account with the posts that contained what I thought was a Southern dialect. The data was sparse, but it led me to believe that the profile I was looking at belonged to the girl I'd spoken to at the coffee shop. Ann Arbor and New Orleans were both mentioned, and the few pictures she had posted were of downtown Ann Arbor. I headed to the coffee shop. Lucretia Newman enhanced the charm of the dark, dank, but somewhat quaint hole in the wall named Mocha's on Main. The cafe was a tiny storefront sandwiched between a used bookstore and a small plates restaurant. I gave the heavy oak doors a yank and entered a dimly lit room with small cheap tables and old sagging couches along the wall. There was also a bar with stools at the front of the cafe. I spotted Lucretia Newman behind the counter. I headed for the last stool at the end of the bar. Lucretia was soft-spoken, with a southern drawl and big brown sad eyes. She wore a tie-dyed purple baby doll shirt and inexpensive skinny jeans that were just shy of being too small. It was clear she had once been petite. Perhaps the yoga class was part of her quest to improve the fit of the jeans. A name tag dangled on her shirt, just south of her chin. I waited patiently for her to blend a coffee drink for the hipster in front of me. To fit the part, I'd taken my hair out of the bun and fluffed it out in a carefree tamed afro. I'd thrown on capris, a tank top, Birkenstocks, and a backpack. Yes, it was still chilly out, but that never stopped anyone in Ann Arbor from dressing like it was mid-June. I'd added glasses and a hippie charm necklace I'd worn in college. It was still winter, but a warm spell had given us temps in the high 40s, so I'd thrown on a vintage jean jacket. It may have been a little overkill, but I blended in well with the eclectic Ann Arbor scene. I ordered a non-fat mocha and sat at the front counter for a while, watching Lucretia work. Nervous, shaky hands led to sincere, apologetic whispers, but she was doing better than she thought. A caring manager encouraged her. I almost felt bad for what I was about to do, but there was no getting out of it. I needed information. This mocha is great. Glad you like it. Are you new? I asked casually. Yes. Welcome. I love this place. Best mochas in A2. No response. Is that an accent I hear? Yeah. Where ya from? New Orleans. Nice. I love that city. You a student? No, I just moved here with my son. He's 2. We're starting over, fresh and new. Her smile was genuine and hopeful. Starting over could mean a lot of things. After Hurricane Katrina, fleeing the Gulf Coast was not uncommon, but that disaster was well in the past now. Perhaps she had left Louisiana for another reason. So, what made you choose Michigan? Got a few good friends here. They helping me get things in order. My life was messed up back home. After Katrina, it was just too hard to get things together. I was just a kid when it struck, but nothing was ever the same after that. No more struggling. I'm ready to make it big in this life. She was working hard to hide her accent and vernacular, but she kept slipping into her southern drawl. Do you plan on going to school? Eventually, but my friend says she go and help me get things together and get me in a program. She owns a daycare, so I don't gotta worry about nothing. That's so cool. Well, welcome to A2. Thanks. What do you think of the city? Haven't seen much, but I like what I've seen. It's a great place. A2 is unique. I think you'll like it. Me too. I don't miss Louisiana as much as I thought I would. Would you like some key lime pie? Maybe lemon cake. It's all made in-house. I considered the lemon cake, but decided against it. No, I'm just tanking up on coffee for lab tonight. What you taking? Chemistry. Oh man, I couldn't handle that. It's challenging, but I like it. Nothing worthwhile is easy, right? Amen, she said before flipping on a blender to mix a drink. So, did you come here to visit and decide to stay? Nah. It was more like a leap of faith. I hadn't been here before I moved. Really? How did you make friends? I asked. She hesitated and looked at the ceiling before answering. Well, they kind of found me. Thank God they found me, she said in a serene voice. I spent the next few minutes making small talk and working to pry any small details from her. Lucretia was nice and eager to tell parts of her story, but she kept the major points to herself. I felt guilty taking advantage of the young girl's optimism and naivety, but over the next week, I continued to stop by for mochas and lattes. On day 6, I took Martin with me. Sneakiness comes easily to him, so when I told him the plan, he was excited and ready to help. I took him in and introduced him as my lab partner. Hey, Lucretia said. Hello, Martin said, his eyes sparkling with admiration. Today, Lucretia's hair was swept up into a bun, and her dark skin held a new glow. She had now mastered her job, and must have been getting used to Ann Arbor, because her southern hospitality was on full display. She talked freely with Martin, who I think genuinely liked her. He maintained eye contact, and the two of them ignored my comments the way potential lovers ignore the third wheel. Towards the end of our stay, I got up and went to the bathroom. Standing at the mirror, I fluffed my unruly locks, washed my hands, and pulled out my phone to check invisible text messages. I counted to 30 before returning to my seat. Martin winked at me the moment I sat down. We stayed for a few more minutes before making an excuse and leaving. Chem lab was waiting. We made our way to the car, cool, calm, and collective. Once we were pulling out of the parking space, Martin began to talk. She told me she'd had a hard time, wasn't ready for anything new. Said her last boyfriend had not been nice to her. She stuttered a bit, looked down when she said it. I think you were right. Something's up with her. What do you think that something might be? No idea. Where is she living? She didn't give me an exact address, but it sounds like she might live with Madeline. She said she's staying with a friend. What else did you find out? Sounds like she was in an abusive relationship. I asked about yoga, and she mentioned that her yoga teacher is amazing. Maybe Madeline Price is a good lady? I listened as we cruised through Ann Arbor. Was I exploiting a young single mom and my lonely brother-in-law? A twinge of guilt welled up in my throat. You really liked her, didn't you? Martin shifted in the passenger seat. We let the silence linger for a few minutes, and then I spoke. You liked her. Martin, I shouldn't have involved you in this. I won't ask you to do anything like that again. It was unfair. It's okay. I'm always asking for more responsibility. Well, you gave it to me. I did kind of like her. She's so pretty. Well, maybe you'll go back and visit her after all this is over. Madeline doesn't know who you are, so there's no reason for you to be connected to this debacle. Afterwards, go back and ask for her number again. She might be a nice girl to get to know. Martin was visibly uncomfortable now. The faint hue of a blush crept onto his cheeks. He looked like a schoolboy in love. How old is she? 23. Maybe she likes younger men. Sylvia. Just saying. I laughed and slugged him in the arm. Whatever. Let's stay on topic, he said, stifling a laugh. How'd she find the yoga studio? Didn't say, but she did say she'd met the friend she's staying with in New Orleans. Madeline has some ties there, right? Yes. So did Liza. You're thinking Lucretia met Madeline in the Big Easy, kept in touch and moved in with her? Sounds like it. That would lead to knowledge of the yoga studio. Wonder how they met. Lucretia is quite younger than Madeline. Maybe a yoga conference? They have that in common. Okay, I guess that works, but the bigger question is, what does it have to do with Liza's murder? Martin asked. No clue. Madeline may have instructed others to kill Liza, maybe for money or just for fun. But what would be the motive? That's the thing. There isn't a motive. Madeline isn't moving in on Carson. She didn't have financial ties, and the yoga studio has nothing to do with Liza. Do you think we're missing something? Have to be. I just don't know what it is yet. 12. The rest of the work week dragged on, without revealing any new information about Liza's murder. I spent hours on Thursday and Friday glued to my computer, typing in different keywords and phrases, hoping to uncover some valuable leads. Even on my day off, Saturday, I couldn't resist spending 6 more hours at the library, scouring through old deeds and newspaper articles for any potential clues. Exhausted from my long day, I fell asleep before even eating dinner and didn't wake up until after 6 a.m. the next day. I keep the Sabbath as much as I can. Sometimes I need to work, but I almost always keep my standing date of 6:30 a.m. Mass. That Sunday morning, I put on a suit and headed to St. John's as usual. By 7:15 a.m., I was normally on my way back home. That Sunday, I waved to the familiar faces, most topped with white hair, before sliding into the second-to-last pew at the back of the church. Mass started at 6:29 a.m. and lasted 40 minutes. Father Keegan gave a gentle homily, encouraging us to welcome the stranger, regardless of who the stranger was. After the procession from the sanctuary was complete, I slipped out of the pew, genuflected toward the altar, and finished the solemn event with a holy water-laced cross on my forehead. Generally, after Mass, I keep my head down, wave at a few acquaintances, and share a brief chat with Father Keegan, who has been my priest since the beginning of time, and head home. On this particular Sunday, however, he held my hand after our cordial handshake, and quietly asked, "May I have a moment of your time?" Father Keegan and I have known one another for decades. He was the priest at the Catholic school I attended as a child. Back then he'd been a spry young man eager to save young souls. Now he was slightly less spry, but still an excellent priest. He had helped me navigate the emotional waters around Derek's death. In answer to his question, I said, "Sure, Father Keegan. I'll be in the social hall in a few minutes. Do you have time to wait?" "Absolutely." I grabbed a cup of coffee, waved to several elderly parishioners, and received a few kisses from blue-haired ladies. 10 minutes later, Father Keegan pulled up a chair at my solitary table. "How are you doing, my friend?" "Doing well. Is everything okay?" "Well, I don't know. Are you working on any cases?" I typically refrain from sharing that information with anyone who doesn't require it. But since Father is both my priest and confidant, he falls into a gray area. Therefore, I admitted to him that the answer was yes. "I see. Someone came here asking questions about you." "Really? Did he or she leave their name?" "No. The woman wasn't very friendly, and she refused to leave her name. She was small, petite, and her hair was pulled back into a bun. The questions she asked were intrusive. I guess she thought an old priest would just fold and answer them. A mistake indeed. Father Keegan had been a priest in the heart of Detroit for several decades before moving to a suburban parish. He knew how to handle intruders and kept a Glock handy. "I'm working on a high-profile case. Do you remember the story about the woman who was killed in Brightmoor? It was about 2 years ago. She was a Northville stay-at-home mom, married to a doctor." "Oh yes. I remember that. Her husband asked me to find her killer." "Oh Sylvia, why do you always want to make things hard on yourself? I thought you usually refused murder cases. You're a pie, this could be dangerous." "Don't worry. I will be careful." "What did this woman ask you?" "She wanted to know where you lived and which mass you attended. I told her I was not at liberty to disclose any information. It was disturbing she knew you attended this parish. She wasn't friendly, Sylvia. I don't know if she's dangerous or not, but you should be careful." Madeline Price was obviously investigating me. It was very strange that she wanted to know about my church habits and where I lived. "Will you try to snap a picture of the woman if she comes back? She's very sly and coy. If I confront her without any definitive evidence, she'll deny everything. I will use my fancy phone to snap a picture, but keep in mind that you don't know who she is yet." "No, but I have a good idea that it is my number one suspect. Her name is Madeline Price. Throw her name out if she comes back, see if she reacts." "Do you really think she's a murderer?" "Part of the reason she's my number one suspect is because she was so reluctant during my interview with her, and I think this murder is rooted in the past. She didn't want to answer questions, and like you said, she's not friendly." "Sylvia, have you considered getting out of law enforcement? Derek was so proud of you. He wouldn't mind if you went a different way." It was true, Derek wouldn't care what I did. He'd always been my biggest fan. "Thank you for saying that. I know it's true, but I feel an urge to do this work, so I'll be in law enforcement until it doesn't inspire me anymore. It's not your fault, the thing that happened. You don't have to make up for something that isn't your fault, Sylvia." "Father, I do this because I feel called to do it. You know what it's like to be called to something, right?" He nodded. "You've got me there. Just be careful, Sylvia." "No worries. I'm always careful." "Well, I hope that this case is solved soon. It's not comforting to know that someone is snooping around, trying to get information about you." I wondered if Madeline knew she was my number one suspect. I felt a little violated, but recognized how hypocritical that thought was. We were both suspicious of each other and searching for answers. Don't worry, I'm a crack shot, I said, winking and getting up to leave. See you next week. Father Keegan called after me. On the walk home, I pondered the meaning behind Madeline's questioning of my priest. She'd asked about my faith when I interviewed her. Had she been on a fact-finding mission too? We were both playing the same game. Back at home, I checked my messages. One of Carson's co-workers had left me a voicemail. Mrs. Wilcox, I know you called me a few months ago, but I have been so busy, I've just now had a chance to get back to you. If you are free, please stop by the hospital this evening. I will be able to chat about Liza and Carson. The co-worker's name was Dr. Brianna Freeman, but I didn't remember calling her. In fact, I was sure that I hadn't called her because I was satisfied with the conclusion the police had come to. Carson wasn't a viable suspect. I was curious about what this woman wanted to tell me, so I played along and go to the hospital. I waited until after 8 p.m. that evening, hoping that the doctor might have a lull in the action. I waited for half an hour before Dr. Freeman could get away and speak with me. She stood almost 6 feet tall, slender and agile. I watched her bounce through the hallway of the hospital with speed and grace, her close-cropped curly gray hair dancing in the air. I suppose you are Mrs. Wilcox, she said, towering over me, giving my hand a firm shake. Yes. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Of course. Anything to help find Liza's killer. Let's head to the lounge downstairs and chat a bit. I grabbed my briefcase and followed her to the stairwell. Dr. Freeman took the 2 flights of stairs with a fierce fit of energy. I raced to keep up with her. She was a tall woman with a confident stride. The lab coat flowed behind her as her long legs moved over the stairs. I never used the elevator. Keeps me young. In the cafeteria, Dr. Freeman grabbed a plastic cup of peaches and an apple. I went for a bottle of grapefruit juice and followed her to a booth at the far end. We sat opposite one another, the doctor struggling to fold her long legs beneath the table. So, you want to know about Carson and Liza, she said. Yes, I said, pulling a pen and notepad out of the briefcase. Well, Liza was a sweetie, nice, simple, and quiet. She was always present for her shifts, smiled and did what you asked her to, but she wasn't a go-getter. How so? She didn't want anything else in life. Most of the girls come through here as CNAs because they want to be nurses or doctors someday. Liza was one of the few who never planned to advance beyond a CNA. That's like the worst job you can have here. They deal with all the stuff no one else wants to. Did she like the job? I don't think so. I think she liked working here, but she wasn't enthusiastic about that job. It was like, I'm here, I'll work, but if you need anyone to go home. She wasn't the person to call if you were short-staffed. Lazy, I thought in between scribbling notes. This description was a bit contradictory to what Peter had told me. He had speculated that Liza impressed Carson in the workplace. So, what can you tell me about Carson and Liza's relationship? I think it was love at first sight. Carson is so gentle. He's always kind and warm with the patients. He was the same way with Liza. In fact, it was after a doctor got nasty with Liza that they started dating. Liza was just cowering in the corner while a doctor berated her about changing out sheets in one of the emergency rooms, and Carson stepped in to defend her. He was still smooth and calm, but he let the other doctor know that it wasn't okay for him to talk to anyone like that. That was how it all started. So Carson isn't a type A person? Well, I wouldn't go that far. What I will say is that he is a very kind and warm person. He still has some tendencies of a type of person, but not like what you see on TV. He's gentle, and he was especially gentle with Liza. What about since Liza's death? Is he the same? Dr. Freeman shook her head. Sadly, he isn't the same man. Misses his wife so much. I nodded and waited for more. I wasn't sure why Dr. Freeman had called me, but it wasn't because I'd called her, so she obviously wanted to tell me something. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. The conversation felt awkward, and I wasn't sure how to extract the information I desired. Do you have any suspects? Dr. Freeman asked. Before I answered, I made a mental note that Dr. Freeman's eyes were anxious and eager. Was she just a close friend of Carson's, or was something else going on? Well, as you know, anyone can be a suspect. But some people are likelier suspects than others. She didn't have anything to tell me. Instead, she was digging for information. I'll keep that in mind, Dr. Freeman. Thank you for meeting with me, I said, standing up to indicate I was leaving. She continued to sit at the cafeteria table. I'm happy to help in any way I can, she said, waiting for more. I nodded, thanked her again, and headed for the parking garage. I wasn't sure what to think about the interview. She was pumping me for information, but I wasn't sure why. Carson hadn't been on my suspect list, and I didn't think that Dr. Freeman had contacted me at his request. Did she really think I wasn't smart enough to remember that I hadn't called her? I was putting different scenarios together as I headed to my car. The click of my black pumps echoed throughout the parking garage. I was still wearing my church clothes, and the eerie quiet of the evening caused the hairs on the back of my neck to stand up. Clutching the briefcase against my leg, I slid my other hand over the butt of my gun. I got the feeling that someone was watching me. A glance around the parking lot revealed nothing out of order, but there seemed to be a double echo. Click, 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 clunk. The clunk was not from my heels. I stopped and scanned the parking garage, remaining silent and looking for any abnormalities. My eyes fell on some movement at the north end of the garage. I spotted a return gaze in the darkness for a split second, but then it disappeared. I ran toward the dark corner. No one seemed to be there, but a slow scan of the parking stalls by the exit revealed a person dressed in black from head to toe. Hey! I screamed before taking off in an awkward sprint. After stumbling a few feet, I paused and kicked off my shoes before continuing to run toward the figure. The figure darted away into the shadows and disappeared from the garage. I doubted I could chase them down, but I made a mental note of their appearance as best as I could. The figure was small in stature, stood about 5'1", and was clearly female. My bare feet were hurting as I pounded against the cold pavement. After a 5-minute pursuit, I stopped running and allowed the shadowy figure to disappear into the night. It was now certain someone was watching my movements. I circled back to the parking garage, located my shoes, and headed home. My house is equipped with an alarm system and cameras on all sides. After I got home, I spent some time watching the cameras and loading my shotgun. Coming to my house would be a big mistake, but this person was bold. I had to be ready. Martin called at around 10 p.m. to see what the plan was for Monday morning. Marty, someone followed me today. What? Yes, someone followed me into the parking garage at the hospital. I chased them for a short while but couldn't catch up. I'm on my way. Martin hung up before I could tell him that wasn't necessary. Was Madeline hunting me? It seemed so far-fetched, but clearly someone was tracking me. It was late, but I called her. She didn't answer, which made me wonder if she was watching me from some secluded spot on the block. I would go by her house first thing in the morning. Martin showed up that evening and camped out on my couch. I slept for just under 6 hours and got out of bed around 4:30 a.m. I started the day by reviewing paperwork and brewing coffee. After the first cup, I threw on sweats and a t-shirt and headed out for my run. The morning air was crisp and brutal, and a light mist left little crystals on my cheeks. Riverside Park was still and abandoned. The gurgle of frigid water harmonized with my footfalls. I thought about what I was going to say to Madeline. If she was following me, she'd be expecting me this morning. That could give her time to prepare. I surprised her by showing up just after dawn. Rude, but hey, it might be the only chance I had. The converted red barn stood stoic and motionless. There were no vehicles in sight, and a swift glance at the mailbox revealed that the mail hadn't been retrieved in quite some time. I knocked on the front door, observing that the "We're Open" sign was still displayed. With little effort, I turned the knob and pushed open the door. It was only 6 a.m., but a sunrise yoga session inside the barn wasn't out of the ordinary. I called out for Ms. Price as I pushed the door open to the yoga studio, finding it empty and impeccably clean. I checked Madeline's office, but everything was in its proper place with no signs of a struggle. Was she missing, or had she left on her own? The eerie howl of the wind and the isolation made me uneasy, but my curiosity drove me to search the rest of the house. It appeared to be empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Madeline was following me. At the same time, I couldn't help but worry that she might be in danger. A stack of letters was on her desk. As I got closer, I realized they weren't letters, they were utility bills for various houses around the state. I took a peek at the bills and realized that the addresses were different. Interesting. As a landlord, it would be wise to pass some of the cost of the utilities on to tenants, but Madeline had not done that, which meant that she probably wasn't a landlord, at least not in the traditional sense of the word. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk and found detailed files on Madeline's clients. Each folder had demographic information, pictures, and what appeared to be short biographies. I closed the drawer and headed to the back of the yoga studio, where a bunch of mats were piled up in front of a door. After shoving the mats out of the way, I tried the door, which was locked. Something in the back of my mind clicked. As a civilian, I had to be careful. Even if I still had a badge, there was no reason to believe that Madeline was missing or in danger. I shouldn't be in her residence. I left the house and headed home. After the third day of not being able to get an answer at the yoga studio, or catch Madeline while she was home, I decided she might be missing for a reason. Of course, someone with properties around the state could always get away. Maybe she had fled because we'd picked up the scent and knew she had probably killed her best friend. Or maybe she was on a hiatus. I got in touch with Carson. "Mr. Stark, have you heard from Madeline?" "Not in the past few days." "Why?" "I haven't been able to get in touch with her. I have some questions, but it seems like she has gone out of town." "Oh yeah, she's probably out of town, not a big deal. I bet she'll be back in the next few days." "Any new info?" I considered telling Carson about the leads we'd been chasing, but realized that we weren't any closer to finding out who killed Liza than we had been on the day we took the case. "I will update you at the end of the week." "Okay. Thanks." I thought about what the update for Carson might sound like. "Mr. Stark, I have discovered that your wife's best friend was probably involved in her murder, but I really don't have any concrete evidence. Oh, and your wife has a child that she abandoned, and she might be the killer. So basically, I don't have anything concrete to share, but the hypotheticals are highly disturbing. Thanks." Defeat was sinking into my soul when the phone rang. "Hello? This is Alyssa Masters. I'm returning a call from Sylvia Wilcox." I held my breath for a minute. Finally. A call back from Damario's sister, who lived in Brightmoor. "Thank you for calling me back, Ms. Masters. I'm investigating a crime, and my brother is in jail, but he probably did it before he got locked up." Her voice was sorrowful. "Actually, I would like to talk with you about some people that your brother knows. May I stop by?" "I guess so." She gave me her address, which matched one of the numerous listings I'd found online. Currently, Alyssa Masters lived on Rockdale, 2 streets away from where Liza's body had been found. The vinyl-sided house was in a state of disrepair, but it looked much better than many other neighboring houses. I parked on the street, checked my surroundings, and headed for the front door. When I knocked, Damario's sister was in the middle of cooking. She pulled the door open and nodded for me to come in. Without saying a word, she moved back into the kitchen. I stood by a small hutch just inside the door, holding my breath, trying to avoid the billowing smoke from the stove. Alyssa was frying a huge mound of bacon, and children were everywhere. I couldn't help but wonder how many kids she had. "Have to make the kids dinner. You can come in here." She spoke without turning to see if I was following her. A boy who was probably 15 or 16 was sitting on a beanbag, with earbuds attached to a cell phone. A younger boy of 5 or 6 was playing with Legos on the dirty beige carpet. A little girl, who couldn't have been more than 2, was standing by the front window playing with the frayed yellow curtains. A voice erupted from the bedroom just before a tiny young woman stormed out, booming with anger. I caught a glimpse of her burning green eyes as she tossed stuffed animals out of her way. An explosive child verging on woman, sporting a red bandana and a long ponytail, she was clearly startled by my presence. I recognized her as one of the thugs I'd seen at Ali Mansu's party store. The only difference was that she was much thinner now. Alyssa Masters met the girl's gaze and the young woman calmed down. "Bro, I'm talking care of business," Alyssa said as she lined a plate with paper towels. "Sorry, Mama," the girl said before heading back into the bedroom. The house was extremely modest, but its cleanliness made it look nice. The wood paneling was old, but clean and intact. Dull faded brown tile ran throughout the kitchen, and there was a small makeshift bathroom in the back corner of the house. From what I could see, the house only had one bedroom. Where did all the children sleep? "Thank you for taking the time to talk with me," I said. "Yep. What you want to know? So, tell me about Demario, Liza Abernathy, and Madeline Price." Demario's sister was barely 5 feet tall, and she had sad brown eyes and an almond-shaped face. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail that flowed to the middle of her back, and she was dressed in scrubs. "I'm working on becoming a nurse. It's tough with all the kids, but we're doing okay." "Congratulations. Are all the kids yours?" She looked at me. "Yes. All 7. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said a second time, hoping to move the interview forward. I held out my hand. Alyssa stuck her hand in mine and gave it a limp shake. "You're welcome." Thought about saying no, but Liza was a decent girl. Not smart, but she meant well. "I'm sad to hear that she was murdered." I hadn't expected that reaction. "Yes, it is sad indeed. So, what can you tell me about Liza?" "Well, in the beginning, she was a sweet kid that my brother brought home one day. We were surprised, because Demario never liked school. He was too old to be there anyway, so we knew he was up to no good. His plan was to meet some woman who would take care of him. He was always lazy, always looking for a free ride. I don't think Liza's family was rich, but they had money. Liza was murdered not too far from here." "Yeah. I remember hearing about that. Didn't recognize the name at first. She was shot here in Brightmoor. Do you find that curious?" "Yep. She must have found another one like my brother. Liza was nice but not smart. My brother is sick, but he always really got into the girls he dated. Liza started playing a game with him after a while, but I don't think she could help it. A rich white girl wasn't going to be with him. She was always going to run back to her parents. Everybody knew it." "Do you know if your brother kept in contact with Liza after they broke up?" "I don't think so, but he did a lot of things I never knew about." "You knew about Liza's death, but Demario didn't." "We aren't close. Couldn't stay in touch with him because of the kids. Demario couldn't be around children." "Yeah. And I know you know why," she said, an edge in her voice. "What else can you tell me about your brother?" "Demario has always been unmotivated and disturbed. He never held a job longer than a few weeks. No woman, especially one who likes money, was going to stay with him. That's just common sense. Liza left the kid with him, so he was satisfied. Didn't really care that she was gone." Alyssa Masters distributed bacon onto the paper towels. "Kids, it's ready," she yelled. Recognizing that Alyssa wasn't open to discussing the reason Demario couldn't be around the children, I asked a different question. "Why did Demario have trouble holding down a job?" Alyssa rolled her eyes. "My mother treated him like a golden calf. She worshipped that boy. Anything that he wanted was his. We all knew that was going to lead to trouble, but she just kept on babying him." "What did your father think of this?" "He was too busy with his other women to worry about us, or the way Mama was bringing us up. My father was in and out of the house, and it was understood that he was cheating on Mama. She seemed to accept it as a way of life. I never once heard her complain about all the women in his life. By the time I was 16, we'd met my dad's full-time mistress. Mama accepted his behavior. It was a terrible example to set for us. My other brother and sisters have fallen into similar patterns. So, DeMario hasn't been a part of your life for a decade. Correct. He has a daughter, who I think he molested. I reported my suspicions to social services. Eventually, I gained custody of Danica, but she was a handful. I have 5 children of my own, so when DeMario wanted her back, I let her go. 7 years ago, DeMario and his daughter were living with my brother. DeMario had a girlfriend who also had a child, and out of the 3 adults, she was the only one bringing in any money. At that point, the household had deteriorated into a full-fledged welfare fraud haven. I wanted nothing to do with it, so I cut ties and moved on with my life. I made a mental note of the discrepancy in the number of children she said she had. First it was 7, not it was 5. How many siblings do you have? Started out with 5 of us, but we're down to 3.5 at this point. My other brother, Raymond, will be dead soon. It was a sad but common Detroit story. Do you think DeMario would hold a grudge against Liza? I think DeMario would use any excuse to kill anyone, but I don't see how he would have a grudge against Liza. He always told her that the only way he would kill her was if she took their child. I'm sure that is why she made the difficult decision to leave the child when she left him. She wasn't being callous. She just knew it was the only way DeMario would let her live. DeMario was fine with the breakup because he got what he wanted? Yep, he is all about control. If he can control the situation and hurt the person he is dealing with, he's happy. Liza made the ultimate sacrifice, and I'm sure he was extremely pleased. What can you tell me about their daughter? Danica. Such a shame. A pretty little thing, but she never had a chance. She was born into a family that had no hope of ever being normal. My parents made sure that we were good and screwed up, and we passed that on to our children. That little girl experienced hunger, abuse, and neglect during her young life. I'm not sure what type of young woman she has grown into, but I'm sure she's struggling. I've looked for her from time to time, but I don't know what the past 7 years have been like. Before that, I know she was always frowning. Her eyes were blank and dull. How old would she be now? About 15. And you don't have any way of getting in contact with her? Not really. My kids tell me they see her around the neighborhood, but I haven't come across her. You might want to check the new shelter they built on Grand River and Lasher. I've heard that she spends a lot of time there. Ms. Masters, what can you tell me about Madeline Price? Alyssa's eyes narrowed. Poor Maddie. Of all the girls my brother could have screwed over, she was the worst choice. Why is that? She was a sweet, brilliant girl who had everything going for her. He pulled her into his world and almost messed things up for her, but Maddie was smart. She got away from him. Were Maddie and Liza acquainted? My brother was seeing both of them. My oldest sister told Madeline, and she confronted Liza. The two had a fight, but Maddie was done. She moved away, taking my niece with her. I don't hold it against her. She made the right choice. Do you ever hear from Madeline's daughter? Nope. Never. Did Liza ever attempt to contact Danica? She didn't want her. She was black, and Liza's parents weren't too keen on that. It was easier for Liza to just leave her behind. Did Danica remember Liza? No. The last time she saw her was during the custody hearing. She was only about 3, so I doubt that she'd remember that. Liza didn't ever try to contact her after that. So, you remember hearing about Liza being murdered behind the party store? Yeah. I remember hearing about it, and not giving it much thought at first. Like I told you, I didn't know it was her for a few weeks. After seeing her face all over the news, I recognized her. A child I hadn't seen before emerged from the basement. She looked to be about 10 years old. Her face was almond-shaped like her mother's. "Ma, can we eat now?" the preteen asked. Alyssa Masters looked at the empty plate where the bacon had been. "You'll have to excuse us, Mrs. Wilcox. I gotta find something else for the rest of them to eat," Alyssa told me. A half-smile crossed her lips. She looked old and tired. "You've been a big help. I appreciate your candidness." I shook Alyssa Masters' limp hand and headed for the car. I stopped by Madeline's house again on my way home. My knocks went unanswered and the door was still unlocked. Yes, it was possible that Madeline was out of town, but why would she leave the door unlocked? What if something had happened to her, and I was the only one who knew she was missing? I decided that was reason enough to enter without permission. I went back to the door that presumably led to the cellar. After shoving the yoga mats out of the way, I pulled on the door handle again. It was still locked tight. Should I pry it open? No. What if Madeline had been kidnapped or worse? It would be a bad idea to have my fingerprints on the door. I wiped the handle clean, looked around, and noticed that it was getting dark outside. Perhaps this wasn't the best idea. Madeline had been avoiding me before she vanished, so maybe she hadn't vanished at all. I headed back to the car and watched the motionless house for another hour. As dusk set in, I pulled out of the driveway and headed home. Where was Madeline Price?